Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bleus Literary Salon virtual edition. Every week I tell you that I'm going to count and see how many of these were, and every week I forget, but I think we're at about 7 now, which is pretty amazing. And that means there's been like 35 readers who've already read. So thank you, everybody who's come out and listened and read and watched and enjoyed this. This is my favorite part of the week. I spend my week alone in my house. So I really like seeing all of you online every Saturday at 1 a.m. in Nairobi. Very exciting. So thank you all for calling in. And a huge thanks to our readers. We have 5 excellent readers tonight. I'm going to ask everybody to please mute if they've unmuted themselves except for Tracy. So our 5 readers tonight are Tracy O'Neill, Anne Lewinson, Elliot Ackerman, Hannah Lillith Assadi, and Fiona Davis. I'm going to hand it over to Tracy to start. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay. Hi, guys. Thanks so much for joining. Happy to be here. So I'm going to read just a little bit of my second novel that came out this week, Quotients. And it has extremely short chapters, and there are a lot of point of view shifts. So I'm going to read the prologue and chapter 2. Okay. Prologue. He'd found a small way to resolve the future. The year he believed that, though in fact the belief would not last the year, was 2005. It was a various year, one he trusted those who euphemistically might be called his cohort, and then didn't, where he quit assuming a fake resume and an ardor for detail could occlude misfortune's gaze. He decided to keep stories to the rooms where they'd happened, but he also aspired to sensible collations of evidence, although, or in particular because, it was a time of perfect aberration. It was when he met Alexandra Chen. In his mind, there was a procedure to calm successions. It began with the call center. There you could rely on emergencies. And so, the night before the year torqued, Jeremy Jordan turned on his headset. A red light in a grid lit. He asked how he could help, not in the manner of hopelessness. My life's action is gravity, callers said their own ways. Help me catch what's falling. What's falling is me. His training was follow the slope of a suffering mind before it inflicts itself on the body, but listen too for what fills the air one cannot see. A source quivers energy off it, persuades the air around it to shake. Sound huddles waves into intimacy. That is the way of a voice or explosion. Telephones. He could hear that somewhere in London, a woman lay silverware in drawers, knives slapping knives, snatching. Signals. They were everywhere if you knew how to heed them. There was some static, a rustle, the woman there and yet closer, in his ear at the center in her house, kilometers reduced as she recalled her husband slamming a door hard enough, a mirror shattered. He slammed it so hard, she said, the image of his departure rained down in shards. From the caller's unseen room, he heard reflections, noise returning. The word, it's thrown and it strikes off the surface, arrives in homecoming a little different. Sometimes the waves ripple out, other times they die. It is water where the word travels clear, no man's land. Sometimes, she said, she wished it were too late for her. He dispatched a mobile crisis unit. He aspired to totem comfort. He told her, you are not alone, meaning only any more than anyone else. Jeremy's head was heavy with the hour of the night, and still to come was his putative real job at the fund. But he would remain on the line until the team arrived for her. And though his voice was reasonable, though his caller was crisp, this was talisman in action, superstitious man. Offer safety, so what life exacted from him would not be Alexandra. He listened to the stranger survive. He said, stay with me. Chapter 2. Jeremy could not move, speak. Happenings were happening too fast, and his mind switched from simple sentences. There was no subject, object, predicate, meaning predicated on simple words, one after the other. He was stuck on 4 syllables. Alexandra. Alexandra held hostage. Alexandra beneath a crush of rubble. 4 syllables with life pulled out from under her. He thought of how he'd never told her he wanted them to die very old, him first, of course, and holding her hand. He had not even told Alexandra he wanted to choose paper towels with her. Assimilate to the moment. In the offices of Strategic Hedge International, the volume of the television normally tuned to Bloomberg was turned high. Coffers stood erect before the men. It was tragic, the explosions, he told them, and the lesson from 01 was it was time to execute the list. They must, he said, offload, sell before the fall. Banks and hotels, British Airways, buy up pharma. It is the responsibility owed their investors. Gavin Thomas's hands already maneuvered over his desk. Try again once, twice, fingers clumsy on his mobile. At his ear, this is the sound of not reaching Alexandra. Soon the internet servers failed, and at some point, after it had been confirmed phone lines had gone down, Jeremy heard talking torsos declare normal programming had ceded to breaking news. 1 dead, King's Cross and Russell Square, Old Street, Moorgate. 1 turned to 20, 20 dead. More information is worse news now, someone said. And it was true, Jeremy knew. Jeremy knew breaking news became broken history. New news early in an emergency was a broadcast of provisional facts. Later, they'd shed authority, permute, redetermine. Information would redouble. He listened for names, hers. From the flat screen, the police commissioner announced it wasn't a coincidence on the underground, it was terror. Jeremy did not need to be told. Around the room, the men of Strategic turned to each other. Speculation shaped their lips. Proximity to the U.S. Embassy at Grosvenor and a dense shopping strip meant that another attack could take them too. Or else, maybe that was optimistic. Maybe everywhere meant open to the end. In a city of 8 million people, Thomas was saying, consider stats 20 to 8 million. Fact is, good fraction, good odds. But Jeremy could not weigh probabilities. He could only think of the impossible. He once had had the other phone, the one his people had given him, not these numbers to nowhere, buttons that wouldn't reach. He could only think of the impossible, though even if he didn't have the old phone, even if she were alive to call, she'd be on the regular service, the Feld one. Alexandra couldn't answer on the secure line. She, after all, had never been a spy. Okay, that's it.
Yay. Thank you, Tracy. You know, it's a little bit weird that you can't hear everybody clapping, but you can see them. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Tracy's book just came out on this past Tuesday, and I've just put in the chat the links to purchase Tracy's book through Bookshop. And thank you, Tracy, so much. I've been a big fan of Tracy's writing for a long time, so I'm very excited for this book in particular. Thank you, Tracy. And so next we have Anne Lewinson. Over to you, Anne.
Unmute myself. Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay, awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paige. Thank you, Tracy, for what you just read. And Paige, thank you for all the work that you're doing in Nairobi. So I'm going to read an excerpt from my book, Still Life with Meredith. It's a novella, just came out last month from Outpost 19. It's about an art handler in a museum. She's actually an animal wrangler because most of the art materials are animals. So she's an animal wrangler. And she's in the midst of some rather epic social distancing. She doesn't leave her apartment. So it's a still life. And she's waiting for her roommate, who's Meredith, who is an emerging artist, to return home. So I'm going to read the part where she recalls how they first met. And I'm going to try to read it off my screen. I met Meredith in the museum one disastrous Saturday afternoon after an accident in the emerging artist wing during the carnival show. You must have read about it. The museum had commissioned some recent graduates to resituate the 19th century notion of the carnival, not the carnivalesque, which is an entirely different thing, within our post-wonder era. I'm not too clear on the details, but I can dig up the call for entries if you're interested. Anyway, it was one of those relational aesthetics things. One artist constructed a funhouse with distorted mirrors that was supposed to make a rather obvious point about eating disorders. Another built a Dunk the Mayor booth to protest the mayor's pledge to cut funding for the museum. I think over those penis-nosed child mannequins. Some luckless sap had to sit on a perch in the booth, half filled with water, wearing an Easter Island-sized papier-mâché mayor mask, waiting for someone to throw a ball at the target with enough force to flush him into the drink. There was a flea circus in a sealed fish tank outfitted with tiny trapezes and trampolines. Circles of magnifying glass were affixed to the sides of the tank like portholes for close-ups of the acrobatics, but the fleas just buzzed around. A large terrarium held what purported to be a secret glimpse of an alien civilization, but it was really just an ant farm. At the center of all this was a small Ferris wheel. One passenger at a time, please. You must be under 5'5" and 120 pounds to enjoy this ride, made entirely of recycled metal, with a seat of Coke cans that crunched when you sat on them. Every afternoon at 2, there was a freak show in which heavily tattooed musicians hammered nails into uncomfortable places. I don't think you'll be surprised when I tell you what happened. It was about 2:15. The freaks were halfway through their show. Metal Man, so called for the hunks of metal poking through his face and chest, as well as, one assumes, less visible parts of his body, was to lift a set of 50-pound barbells hooked to the 2-foot-long metal rod that bisected his nostrils. This required an impressive backbend, and the gallery was so quiet you could hear the ants farming. The barbells went up in the air. The room held its breath. It was at this moment that some kid thought it would be hilarious to take the ball from the mayor dunker and toss it at Metal Man in what were presumed to be his heavily armed nether regions. What followed was a chain of reactions worthy of Rube Goldberg. The ball hit the balls. Metal Man doubled over as the barbells fell, along with the 2-foot-long rod and attached bits of nose, all of which rolled into the funhouse mirror so fast that they shattered, a shard of mirror flying into the dunking booth and into the exposed eye of the mayor, who plummeted straight into the water, banging his head so hard on the glass that the booth smashed, flooding the gallery and nearly electrocuting the woman sitting on the stalled Ferris wheel, who was propelled with the force of the shock smack into the ant farm. Only the fleas remained unscathed. It was my job to recover the ants, at least the ones that hadn't drowned. Okay, if I hit the power? I'd been watching her towel off her Ferris wheel, as if the afternoon's calamity had been no big deal. She walked past me, sodden on the floor, almost imperious. I marveled at the way her jeans fit, like a boy's, low on her hips, tight against her thighs. I wanted to touch those thighs. No, I wanted to have those thighs on my body. I buried that familiar intermingling of envy and lust. She would not see me coveting her thighs. Is yours? She was speaking to me. She of the perfect thighs. Thighs that would pass the Eileen Ford leg test. I may seem to be above such things, but I will not pretend that I have never opened a fashion magazine. And so I not only know who Eileen Ford was, but the substance of her famous leg test. It's like a Leonardo diagram defining the correct proportions. The legs, when pressed together, must form 3 diamonds between the thighs, between the knees and the upper calf muscle, and between the upper calf muscle and the ankle. And I found myself possessed with the alarming desire to perform the Eileen Ford leg test on the legs before me, to measure the width of the diamond between her thighs, the diamond that I knew was there, obscured by those jeans that I would unbutton so that I could rest my cheek against that pale diamond, unbuttoned right there, sopping wet on the floor among the dead ants and fish and broken glass. The temptation was too great. I couldn't bear to look up above her paint-speckled Converse high tops. No, I just work here, I said. Animal wrangler. You must be busy these days. We're doing an all-animal show in the spring. You take care of the dead ones too? Sometimes. Not much to wrangle, though. I was thinking of doing something with roadkill. I use recycled materials, mostly metal, and there are a lot of dead animals out there on the highway just decomposing. No one buries them. They just lie there, waiting to be eaten by other animals. And how do they get to be roadkill? By unlucky collisions with big hunks of metal. And I've been using a lot of auto parts lately. I nodded, still on the floor, coaxing the ants into a glass jar. She never looked down at me as she talked. She was being used to being listened to by strangers, to being found fascinating. Then a business card fluttered down to me. I'm having a party tomorrow night. You should come. Her storefront was near the university, right on the park. This was when nobody went to the park, before the gentry moved in and renovated the brownstones, before those free-range bistros and wooden toy stores and single-origin coffee joints. And the neighborhood held that eerie nighttime quiet engendered by fear. But her lights were on. Christmas lights, framing the windows of a store that sold nothing. Branches had been set up in the windows and birds flew from perch to perch. The room was dense with people from somewhere else who all seemed to know each other. People and their smoke. No one noticed me. Ban smoking all you want, but it will always be the lingua franca of the people who matter. Without a cigarette between your fingers, you disappear. I wandered invisible through the crowd. Some of the freaks were there. Metal Man had a large bandage on his stitched up nose that made him sound like he had a cold. On one wall, there were large format black and white photographs of a naked woman of indeterminable ethnicity, impossibly glamorous, impeccably formed. Beneath them was a battered yellow sofa with an undulating carved wood back, the kind of Salvation Army special people like Meredith always have. Beside it, a mannequin's head impaled on a metal frame a little taller than my own, breast implants hanging at chest level. I had never seen breast implants up close, and summoned the nerve to poke them. They felt like sacks of oil. You like Meredith's work? A man was standing beside me, older than most of the people there. He introduced himself as Meredith's roommate, the photographer of those pictures on the wall. I kept poking. They used to be inside her, he said, nodding at the model in the photograph. I shuddered and withdrew my hand, looking for something to wipe it on. I leaned against a wall, sipping a room temperature beer and observing like an anthropologist. On the rare occasion that someone invites me to a party, I always end up playing Margaret Mead. I don't enter the bush that way. It's just that once I'm there, it's like they're all speaking Swahili. I fall back on old habits, observing the mating rituals of this foreign, lightly self-confident race. Will red polka dot dress and Betty Page hairdo go home with greasy hair, holy t-shirt, and plumber's ass? Or thinks he's the millionth coming of Jim Morrison, but is closer to Jesus in a community theater production of Godspell? This usually keeps me occupied for hours. But that night, I was overcome with the more pressing desire. I wanted to figure out how to stay in the storefront on the park with its orange wall-to-wall carpet and uncaged birds. How not to leave the party. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. You just gave me really funny memories of being in probably like middle school and learning about the Eileen Ford leg test with some of my girlfriends and trying it out on ourselves. And I'm going to post the link here in the chat to Anne's book. There we go. And thank you again. Thanks so much, Anne. Now I'm going to pass it over to Elliot Ackerman.
Hey, thanks so much. It's great to be with you all. And thanks again, Paige, for setting this up. This is actually my first Zoom call for this book, which is my latest, Red Dress in Black and White, which comes out a week from Tuesday. And the novel is set in Istanbul, where I lived for several years. And it primarily circles the events around the 2013 Gezi Park protests, which were sort of Turkey's equivalent of the Arab Spring. And it's about a woman named Catherine who has been married for many years to Murat, an influential Turkish real estate developer. And the two of them have a young son together, a boy named William. But when Catherine decides to leave her marriage and return home to the United States with William, along with her photographer lover, a guy named Peter, who's in the section I'm going to read, her husband decides that he's going to take a stand, and he enlists the help of an American diplomat to prevent his wife and child from departing the country. But by inviting this scrutiny into their private lives, Marat only becomes kind of further enmeshed into a web of deception and corruption, and the hidden architecture of all of the relationships between these characters is gradually exposed, and we learn the true nature of what's a cast of like struggling artists, wealthy businessmen, expats, spies, and ultimately this child, William, who's being pulled in different directions by his parents. And ultimately, too, I think it's a book about a society that's in crisis. So the section that I'm going to read is from the opening of the book, or near the beginning of the book. And the novel is told over a single day. So the chapters are sort of time-stamped. And it's Peter, who is Catherine's lover, and he is kind of reflecting or remembering basically one of their first and early meetings. So it begins 3:30 that morning. His apartment has a view. It seems they all do. This is an advantage of living in a terraced city, one that reaches into the hills. The window by Peter's bed looks out on the first Bosphorus Bridge. Its spans and cables are ornamented with turquoise LED lights that reflect off the water, which glides past like black oil. The strong current swirls in the light, and the surface of the deep straits swims with color. 40 years before, the bridge's construction had been touted as a great triumph, even though an unspoken shame surrounded its completion. Why had it taken more than a millennia to connect the two sides of this city? Looking at the bridge, he thinks of his exhibit from earlier in the evening, of Denise and the others, including Catherine, staring at two disconnected versions of themselves. These many years later, the bridge has not had the desired effect. After Gezi Park, the country is riven with divisions, and in this way, Peter can understand the shame associated with a bridge built too late. His head is on the pillow as he watches the current, hoping it might hypnotize him to sleep. The sunrise is still a few hours off, yet his mind roams, keeping him awake. Catherine knows he plans to leave. He feels certain of it. He feels equally certain that she can't come with him, even if he wanted her to, which he doubts. She is bound up in Marat and their son. Perhaps this is why he had succumbed to their affair in the first place, because he knew that it could go nowhere, that it had to finish in this way. And since he had already understood the nature of its ending, he could be absolved of responsibility, for they both knew this was the inevitable destination. As Peter looks at the bridge, his thoughts stray to what he considers their first night. Although they had met for dinner once before at the Istanbul Modern, this meeting occurred a few days later, when they had bumped into one another at a gallery opening for the controversial artist Taner Ceylan, whose violent, sexually charged, and hyper-realist paintings resembled photographs. After the event, they had searched the crowded streets for a taxi and had then wandered onto the bridge, which was more like a highway, and usually closed for people to walk across, but it was open that day, so they had chosen to cross it together and, perhaps with a bit of luck, to find a ride home on its far side. In the center of the bridge, she had approached the railing, staring 200 feet below at the dark, churning current. She waved Peter toward her so that he might look as well. "Come here, Peter." He remained a few steps from the railing and didn't move. "Don't you want to look? We're right between Europe and Asia. We're not on any continent." She leaned deeply over the railing. "This bridge is my favorite place in the city." "This whole city is a bridge," said Peter. "Maybe so," said Catherine. The Bosphorus ran dense as mercury beneath them. Peter glanced to its banks,
to the 2 continents, to Istanbul, a city so illuminated that it vanished the power of the moon. But you can't live on a bridge. Why don't you come back from the railing, Peter suggested. Are you afraid of heights, she asked. The wind was quick to carry away her voice, and he could barely understand her. Everyone has one existential fear, she continued, but now she wasn't looking down. Instead, she stared at him, and he could see the light from the water reflected from below, its projection playing off her eyes. For instance, my husband. His fear is that he won't be a success, or at least that he won't measure up to his father. Peter offered a confused look, revealing the absurdity of this fear for a man whose business conquests riddled the skyline. It's not as ridiculous as you may think. None of us sees ourselves as others see us, if only we could. Our vision of ourselves is like our voice. The world hears us one way, but inside our head, our voice sounds entirely different. There's no possibility of recording that voice, of sharing it with anyone. We go our whole lives without another person ever hearing us the way we hear ourselves. How people see themselves is the same, and there is no clearer way to understand that differing version than to understand those insecurities, to understand that one fear. It had rained the hour before, and the bridge light shone on the wet pathway. He asked what her fear was. Why should I tell you? He took one cautious step and then another, shuffling his feet as he transferred his weight, as though at any moment while he was drawing closer to her, the ground beneath him might fall away. Then he lunged forward and gripped the railing as desperately as if it were flotsam on the open ocean. He glanced up at her, smiling the heedless smile of an idiot, his eyes searching for some reaction, as if she might reward what he perceived to be his conquest of fear. Or, put another way, his courage when grasping the railing, even though he was paralyzed by heights. That night as they stood on the bridge, the wind kept snatching away their voices. Peter had needed to lean in close to Catherine so that he could be heard. The idea of falling terrifies me, he confessed. I can feel the vertigo in my stomach. The vertigo isn't from your fear of falling, she said. It's from your hidden desire to jump. That's why we feel vertigo. Peter pressed his body against the railing and took another deep look at the water below. So are you going to tell me your fear, he asked. You weren't paying attention, she said. I just did. She told him to feel how her heart was beating. He reached for her wrist to take her pulse, but she said, we aren't children, are we? And placed his hand elsewhere. They had continued their crossing, and on the far side, they finally found a cab. He held open the door for her, and they climbed inside. Peter gave the driver his address. When he glanced back at Catherine so that she might give her address as well, she said nothing. Their taxi climbed the steep, winding roads, and through her omission, they both made their way back to his apartment. Neither of them spoke. Their eyes avoided one another's in the back seat. Past the door, a rocky bluff plunged hundreds of feet below. Peter was turned toward his window, away from her. He couldn't help but look at the drop. Thank you.
Sorry, I keep not unmuting myself. Thank you so much, Elliot. One of my favorite things about this so far has been when people are reading from places that I can see really well, you know, on a bridge over the Bosphorus in Istanbul. And so it's just so nice to think about past travels and being able to experience different places again, other than inside all of our homes, which I'm sure we're all quite sick of at this point. So thank you so much, Elliot. I'm going to paste the link to Elliot's book, which you can still pre-order in the chat there. And there it is. Great. Thank you, Elliot. And now I'm going to pass it over to Hannah Lillith Assadi. Hi, Hannah.
Hi. Sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. I'm not so used to this as some people are. Such a pleasure to be here. Tracy's book came out this week, and I would have loved to have done a reading with her in person, but we're doing a reading together, so here we are. And it's always a pleasure to read for Late Blow with Paige. And I miss you, Paige. So also to hear from all of the beautiful work we've already heard from about the Appel du Vide and the vertigo on that bridge. I really feel that. Anyway, I'm going to read from my forthcoming book called The Stars Are Not Yet Bells. And it's supposed to come out in about a year, but who knows what's happening to time. So we shall see. Anyway, I'm going to read from the middle-ish, and all you really need to know is about a woman who is suffering from a form of dementia, sort of unspecified. And as she loses her memory, she starts to see into this other kind of realm that starts to occupy the island where she lives. So in this scene that I'm going to read, she's in the middle of this sort of fugue state, and you start to kind of see some of what she's seeing, and then you're abruptly brought out of it. I think that's all. Okay. No, I was never on Neponset, I say to the dark. Simon is already gone. The wind has flown the aged magazine from the bed, its pages splayed open to an advertisement for Camel's cigarettes. Nothing else from all that past remains. Not the Neponset house, not Gabriel, hardly myself or my husband. I want it all back. I want to devour a hot dog in Coney Island. I want to look in the mirror and find my body, youthful and shining with blemishes across the chin and cheeks. I want to be haunted by the music of sex. I want to want. But time has no further reservations with desire for me. Life diminishes our breath until we are but the size of a grave, and then less than that. I shake the cat Mina to look at me, but it is cruel to do, for she is so very tired. Her eyes blink flirtatiously and then close. I cannot tell if we are deep in summer or already in fall. Perhaps the seasons are on the brink of ending completely, to make way for a fifth time of year, one in which the sky and the sea no longer have a barrier. Such is the fog pressing against the windows, making the island as gauzy as the blind dream. Since no one is here to mind my coming or going, I leave for a walk. There is no moon. Indeed, it is like that fifth season, the one that will draw the next world into our own. There is lightning in the clouds, a bonfire gathering in the heavens. Halfway across the lawn, the house disappears completely. When I find the sea past the woods, it is calm. It lies like a lake toward forever. I rest in the lawn chair beneath the umbrella. The sound of the sea draws me into the diaphanous world of sleep. Then back to the long drive before our home. But at the door inviting me in are two old ladies I have never seen before. Inside, the house is in a marvelous state of disrepair. The staircases slump and the fixtures droop from the ceiling. The lights in the chandeliers are either dimmed or fully blown out. Dust clings to everything. The house is stripped of furniture except for a single room with a bed in it I have never seen before, which I am informed is the one that will be my own. The ladies say, "We are happy you are here. Welcome, welcome." I glance out of one of the windows and expect to find the ocean again, but instead the oak trees are afire. Their branches grow flames rather than leaves. Black smoke subsumes the sky. When the ladies notice my eyes wandering out onto the destruction, they draw close to me and ceremoniously shut the blinds. "Where am I?" I ask them. "You have always lived here," they say. Dawn rises over the sea. The last streaks of night and its parade of stars fade in the west. Day emerges again with gratitude to the sturdy, murderous hand of time. All possible shades of pink and purple reflect off the water. I look back at the woods with the fear of my dream, that everything is on fire. But instead of fire, there is again that blue voltage shimmering through the branches, traveling into the sky, pulsing and luminescent. Then, walking along the coast beneath umbrellas of a very different era, are the two ladies from my dream. They pause before me and look up at me in the chair. One points and the other squints. For a second, I stare across the stand at myself, then at Ethel. I close my eyes again and open them, and two wild horses, chestnut and white, have taken our place. I quit the scene as fast as an old lady can, not quite running, but not walking either. Back in our driveway, I am relieved that our house remains. Simon and Raymond are in the car, idling. Where have you been? Simon screams when he sees me. Looking down, I realize I am still in a nightgown. I hunt quickly for a proper sounding excuse. I was walking to Tilly's after I lost my glasses, you see, in. Tilly's is gone, Elle. It's been gone for many, many years. Simon looks at Raymond meaningfully. I know that, I shudder. I knew that it was gone. I just wanted to see it, what it had become. I had this dream, I begin to say. I have to tell them, to warn them. Our house is being haunted by the ghosts of horses. We're not doing this with you today, Simon says. Get in the car, we're already late. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Hannah's readings always make me so emotional because I love seeing your really good friends putting their all into creating a new beautiful piece of art. Thank you so much, Hannah. Can you remind us what the name of that new book is so we can pay attention for it?
Yeah, The Stars Are Not Yet Bells.
Excellent. And I'm going to paste in the chat a link to Hannah's book, SONORA. That is also brilliant, so highly recommend. Thank you so much, Hannah. And now I'm going to hand it over to Fiona Davis. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you so much. This is a lovely way to spend an evening. My book, which comes out July 21st, is called The Lions of Fifth Avenue. It takes place at the New York Public Library, and it has two timelines. One is in 1913 from the point of view of the wife of the superintendent. Her name is Laura Lyons, and she lives in an apartment inside the library that actually exists with her husband and two kids. And the other timeline is 1993, and that's what I'll be reading today. That's from the point of view of Sadie, who works at the library. And when rare books start going missing, she has to get to the bottom of it and figure out how it relates to some book thefts from 1913, as well as a tragedy that happened to the superintendent and his family back then. And the reading I'll be doing is from the beginning of the book in 1993. And Sadie's at work with her colleague, Claude, and they've just heard that their boss, Marlene, is missing, and they've been called into the director of the library's office. Lovely to see you, Claude and Sadie. Please do take a seat. The director of the library, Humphrey Hooper, MLS, PhD, spoke with a quick, flat cadence, something Sadie had noted when she first met him a decade ago. Originally from Alabama, he'd somehow mastered a vocal inflection that couldn't be pinned to a particular place, yet clearly signaled an upper-class upbringing, like Cary Grant in the old movies. Since that first meeting, Sadie had risen from assistant librarian to assistant curator of the Berg collection by learning everything she could about the library, from the genealogy department to the map room to the prints and photograph department, by staying late and coming in early. Claude, sitting in the chair next to her, had taken a different approach, taking his superiors out to lunch and wooing them with his charm and wit. He wasn't handsome. His eyes bulged out slightly, and his upper lip tended to sweat when he got excited. But he had broad shoulders and a thick head of hair, and most of the female librarians swooned when he paid them the slightest bit of attention. He'd shined his light on Sadie during the library's last Christmas party, kissing her in the back office area and making her feel breathless and beautiful. That time of year had always been a dismal one for Sadie. Christmas Eve was when her father had passed away, so that even decades later, the sight of a pine tree aglow with a riot of primary colors induced in her an anxious melancholy. It also happened to be Christmas Eve when, sick with dread, she'd rifled through her now ex-husband's briefcase and found a bill for a credit card she'd never known about, filled with charges to the Washington Square Hotel and several Greenwich Village restaurants, all conveniently located near NYU, where Philip was a tenured math professor. Even though that was 6 years ago, the holidays still filled her with an ominous apprehension that the world might fall apart at any minute. So it was really no surprise that with Claude's unexpected kiss, even though his breath smelled like scotch, Sadie's Yuletide clouds of misery had gently evaporated. He'd been away for a week after that, during which time she'd let her imagination run wild, thinking of them together, wandering around the city, roaming from bookstore to bookstore. After he'd returned, they'd gone out to lunch together and sometimes dinner, where he held her a little too long when they said goodbye out on the street. At work, he'd made sweet overtures, like sharing a magazine article on the new Tennyson biography, or passing along the Times crossword once he'd finished the paper. But then, one morning, she turned the corner near the administrative offices and spotted him deep in conversation with one of the young pages who worked in the stacks. The girl had thrown her head back and laughed, a high-pitched, ludicrous sound like she was being strangled with sleigh bells, and something in Sadie had shut down hard. The ups and downs of heartbreak were not for her, no way, not after what she'd already been through with Philip. That same day, deep in the stacks of the Berg collection, Sadie had come across an intriguing title she didn't remember seeing before. A first edition of Surviving Spinsterhood, The Joys of Living Alone, published in 1896 by Abigail Duckworth. She plucked the thin volume from the Berg's caged shelves and began reading, turning her back so any passing pages couldn't see what was in her hand. She'd flown through it, delighted at the timeless advice for successfully maintaining independence as a woman, chock full of pithy chapter headings like solitary refinement and pleasures of a single bed. For decades, women had lived happily, easily without a man. That was good enough for her. Claude had made overtures after that and been rebuffed at every turn. If he brought her the crossword, she'd say she already finished it. Articles, read them. These days, she and Claude had maintained a respectful, if chilly distance, and whenever loneliness threatened, she'd pluck the book off the shelf and turn to a random page for a quick dose of witty inspiration. In Mr. Hooper's office, she smoothed down the voluminous skirt of her dress, hoping Mr. Hooper didn't find her outfit too frivolous for someone who'd just given a tour to trustees. That morning, she'd chosen a marigold-colored 50s shirt dress with thin orange stripes, admiring the way the full skirt fell away from her hips. It had been one of her most recent finds at the antique boutique thrift store downtown on Broadway. But today, under the harsh lights of the director's office, the yellow zinged brightly, perhaps too brightly. She'd gotten used to the various reactions to her daily ensembles, ranging from a surprised, "How lovely," to, "Well, that's an interesting outfit." Sure, her tastes were a far cry from the current craze for Doc Martens and oversized suits, but eventually they'd come back into style, and she'd have the last laugh. In the meantime, she liked the idea of wearing a piece of history, whether it was a tailored 1930s suit, only slightly faded, or the 50s frock she wore today. Mr. Hooper consulted his notes. "We've had to do some reshuffling, Marlene. Marlene, as you know, unexpectedly extended her vacation. Permanently, it turns out." "What?" Sadie and Claude spoke at the same time. "She reached out to me yesterday to let me know that she's taken the job of Chief of Collections at the Boston Library." Sadie sat back, stunned. That explained the unexpected goodbye hug that Marlene had given her the Friday before she left for vacation, as well as her extra detailed instructions for while she was gone. The decision to take the job, in charge of all the collections at the third largest library in the country, must have been very difficult. Yet it was a big step up, and Sadie just wished Marlene could have felt comfortable confiding in her. But that wouldn't have been professional, and Marlene was nothing but professional. "She was poached?" asked Claude. Mr. Hooper harumphed. "Yes, she gave her resignation yesterday. and apologized for the short notice, but said that it couldn't be helped. She added that she was certain the two of you could carry on the mantle. I hope she's right. This is terrible timing with the Berg collection exhibit to open in May. We're in a bind. If Marlene was no longer in charge, the logical next choice would be either Claude or Sadie. Sadie had been in the library longer, but Claude had more years at the Berg collection. It was a toss-up. What can we do to help, Mr. Hooper? Asked Claude. There's no time to look for an outside hire, so I've talked with the board of directors, and we've decided that we'd like Sadie to take the helm, for now. The director wanted Sadie to become the curator of the Berg collection, one of the most esteemed literary collections in America, right when they'd be mounting a major exhibition that would be written about in all the newspapers. I'm sorry, but why Sadie? Claude was not amused. I've been working closely with Marlene this past year, day after day. I know what she wants to include. Right, said Mr. Hooper. Luckily, we have the final list, so there's no decisions to be made there. As much as we appreciate all your hard work, of course. Sadie's been at the library longer, and we hope we'll bring her comprehensive knowledge to bear as we get the exhibit up and running. That means long hours, lots of research and writing, but we believe you both will rise to the occasion. Of course, Sadie tried to contain her joy. What she really wanted to do was leap to her feet and jump up and down the way her 6-year-old niece Valentina did when she won at Connect 4, but that wouldn't do at all. I'll get right on it. Thank you. I want to be clear, this is on a trial basis. I'll make another more permanent decision after the exhibit is up and running. He shifted to address Claude. Claude, I can't tell you how much we appreciate all of the hard work you've done and will continue to do. What an opportunity. The job went way beyond her current role as a chronicler of old books and literary paraphernalia. As the face of the exhibit, she'd be able to share her love of these historical objects and the emotions they represented to her with the world. She might even get offered the job for good as the permanent curator of the Berg. For the next 20 minutes, Mr. Hooper went through the list of exhibit items one by one in alphabetical order, asking for a progress report. All went smoothly until he reached the L's. I noticed that the Laura Lyons walking stick is on the list of exhibit items, he said. In the past 5 years, there'd been a reawakening in interest around Laura Lyons, as her essays were re-examined by feminist scholars and cited for their forward thinking. The few details of the writer's reclusive life were being mined for clues, which made the walking stick a perfect choice. But Sadie stiffened as Mr. Hooper continued on. Since she lived here at one point in her life, I want you to go through the library's archives, see if you can find anything about her that we've missed. I'd like to include more than the walking stick, an essay, some original piece of her work, a letter, something that would attract a lot of attention. I'll do that, offered Claude. No, I'll do it. Sadie didn't care that she was being rude. I studied her work in college and so have a background that will be useful. Of course, all her private letters and manuscripts were destroyed right after her death, so I'd really be surprised if we found anything of interest. In any event, let me know what you discover. Sadie avoided meeting his eyes, as she assured him she would. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Gosh, what I would do to be in a library or in a museum right now, I can't even tell you. Thank you for reading from that. I'm going to post the link to Fiona's book so that you can pre-order from it because it comes out in July. But Fiona has many, many books. How many books do you have, Fiona? 5 books. So click around and look. There's more Fiona Davis out there before July. So thank you so much. That was such an incredible group of readers. Thanks to Tracy and Anne and Elliot and Hannah and Fiona. If you've never been to Lablo before and you'd like to receive the emails, please just put your email in the chat and I will add you. I know I'm supposed to ask that at the beginning, but I forget every week, so I apologize. I won't end it right away. Thank you all for calling in. It's so nice to see all of you every Saturday night. And we're going to keep doing this through the end of June. So there's still a lot of readers to come every Saturday at 6 p.m. New York time. Thank you all so much for coming. Big thank you again to Tracy, Elliot, Hannah, Anne, and Fiona for reading. And we'll see you again.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.